Banff National Park is one of the most stunning places on Earth. Crystal clear lakes, towering mountains, and endless trails that make you feel like you're in a dream. But behind all that beauty, there's a darker side that most tourists never hear about. Over the years, Banff has been the site of some truly chilling tragedies. Stories of adventure that took a terrifying turn. In this video, we're diving into 5 of the most horrific deaths in Banff National Park history. It was January 2nd, 2001, a crisp winter afternoon in Banff National Park. Frances Frost, a 30-year-old artist and dancer with a deep love for the outdoors, decided to venture out on a solo cross-country ski near Lake Minnewanka. She was just getting over a cold and craving fresh air, the kind of peace only nature could offer. The trail she chose, the Cascade Fire Road, was familiar territory. She had skied it many times before. Confident and free, she set off around noon, gliding through the quiet wilderness she adored. Frances wasn't just any visitor. She had grown up in Edmonton, danced with Ballet North, and later became a dancer in residence at the Banff Center. When she wasn't on stage, she was guiding tours in Kosakosski, always seeking that pulse of life in the wild. That day, she was simply doing what she loved, alone but not afraid. What she didn't know was that something else was moving silently through those same woods, something watching. Earlier that day, wildlife officials had received unsettling reports. A cougar had attacked a dog near a residential area. Another woman, walking her own dog near Middle Springs, had been followed by what was likely the same animal. It was bold, erratic, behavior not typical of a creature that usually avoids people. The signs were there. Something was off. As Frances neared the end of her ski just 300 meters from her car, the predator made its move. The cougar had been stalking her, patient and silent, until it saw its chance. It struck. What happened next was brutal and fast. Frances fought with everything she had, but she was alone, and the cougar, driven by hunger and something far more desperate than instinct, overpowered her. Later, a group of skiers stumbled upon the aftermath. The cougar had disappeared, but not for long. It returned to its prey just as Parks Canada wardens arrived, and this time they were ready. They acted quickly. The cougar was killed on the spot. Officials later confirmed it was the same animal involved in the earlier incidents. What made this even more chilling? This was the first, and still the only, fatal cougar attack in Alberta's history. That evening, back in Edmonton, Frances's parents saw a news headline: 30-year-old woman killed by cougar in Banff. Dread crept in. They tried calling her, hoping for a miracle. Then came the knock at the door. A police officer stood there with the words no parent ever wants to hear. Still, the questions wouldn't go away. Laura, a scientist with ties to wildlife experts, searched for answers. Why had this happened? Why Frances? That winter, food was scarce in the region. Parks Canada had been relocating elk to manage overpopulation, which may have disrupted the ecosystem. Some speculated that Frances's recent illness may have made her seem vulnerable. Predators in the wild have a way of sensing weakness. But even with all the theories, nothing fully explained what occurred. Cougars are solitary and cautious. They don't attack people, yet this one did. The randomness made it more terrifying. How could anyone have known? How close had others come that day? Frances's friends and family were left with a void no explanation could fill. Today, Banff remains vigilant. Cougar sightings still happen, but there are new systems in place, new awareness, more urgency. The wilderness hasn't changed. It's still beautiful, still powerful. But Frances Frost's story lingers in the cold mountain air, a haunting reminder of how quickly the wild can turn. On the 20th anniversary of her death in January 2021, Laura reflected quietly. What if Frances hadn't been alone that day? What if something had changed the outcome? There are no clear answers. Just the memory of a life lived passionately, and a silence in the snow where once there was laughter. It was July 21st, 2020, a quiet day in Calgary, but for 69-year-old Vita Smith, it would be the last day of her life. Vita wasn't just anyone. She was sharp, quick with numbers, and known in gambling circles for one thing: counting cards. Alongside her longtime friend and business partner Kevin Barton, better known by his alias Chris Lee, she'd spent years working casinos across the country, beating the odds and cashing in. But that world, full of high stakes and fast money, has a way of changing people, and what once was trust slowly became tension. That day, Vita and Lee met up for what was supposed to be a simple deal. She had gotten hold of a passport from her ex-husband, a lifeline for Lee, who had been banned from most casinos. The agreement was clear, $10,000 in exchange for the document. But when the time came, Vita didn't hand over a passport. She gave him a birth certificate instead, and then tried to walk away with the cash. Something snapped. Lee would later claim he only meant to stop her from leaving, that he grabbed her in the heat of the moment. But in his version, within seconds, she stopped breathing. No cry for help, no attempt to resuscitate. Just panic. Instead of calling 911, he made a chilling choice. He placed Vita's lifeless body in the back of his SUV and drove off. That was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Lee tried to erase what happened. He ditched Vita's car at a local business, stashed her belongings, and kept her body hidden in his vehicle. He even drove to Edmonton, trying to think through his next move. All the while, Vita's family waited, unaware that their mother, their friend, was already gone. When she didn't return home, a missing persons report was filed. The worry quickly turned to suspicion, and all signs pointed to Lee. Surveillance footage placed him with Vita on the day she vanished. Police watched him, tracked his movements. When they finally arrested him, what they found was damning. Inside his vehicle were Vita's phone, her wallet, her purse, and something else. 5 loaded firearms, ammunition, and signs that he had tried and failed to cover his tracks. Blood in the car, her DNA on handcuffs. A struggle had taken place inside that SUV. This wasn't a clean accident. This was chaos, fear, desperation. For nearly 3 years, Vita's remains were nowhere to be found. Her family searched. They hoped. They feared the worst. Then, in a grim turn, Lee led investigators to a remote rest stop along the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park, a place travelers pass by without a second thought. Until now, the terrain was brutal, the weather unforgiving. It wasn't until 2023 that search teams finally uncovered what had been left behind, the remains of a woman discarded like an afterthought, just off a road surrounded by beauty and silence. For Vita's family, it was a moment of heartbreak and closure all at once. Her daughter, Netta Power, stood in court and described the betrayal, the pain of knowing that her mother had been treated like she meant nothing. Lee had been under pressure. Casinos were cracking down, the pandemic was cutting off income, and his own efforts to cheat the system had failed. He was spiraling, and in that one decision, that one moment of violence and cover-up, he sealed Vita's fate and his own. In 2023, he was convicted of manslaughter, a sentence, but not justice, not really. Nothing could undo the betrayal. Nothing could bring Vita back. Her story leaves behind a haunting question. How far can trust be stretched before it finally breaks? Would things have ended differently if Lee had just let her go? Or was the friendship already poisoned long before that day? It was January 10th, 2020, deep in the rugged silence of Banff National Park. That morning, Dr. Laura Kosakosski clipped into her skis with confidence and joy. The 34-year-old family doctor from Canmore was no stranger to the wild. Alongside her husband, Adam Campbell, and their close friend, Kevin Hiros, Laura set off into the backcountry for what was supposed to be another memorable day in the mountains. Laura had logged over 80 backcountry trips in just 3 years. Adam was a professional ski mountaineer. Kevin, a certified mountain guide with deep avalanche training. They'd planned this trip for months, carefully studying the terrain and weather. They knew the risks, and they thought they were ready. The snow had fallen heavily the week before. Temperatures hovered around negative 15 degrees Celsius. Avalanche conditions were manageable down low, but more treacherous up high. Still, the group pressed on. Equipped with beacons, shovels, probes, and years of experience, they moved through the landscape with cautious precision. They weren't reckless. They were prepared. By mid-morning, they had already completed several runs, each descent a dance through untouched powder. Spirits were high. They decided on one final line before calling it a day. Adam and Kevin dropped in first. Laura stayed back, preparing for her descent. She was just minutes behind them. Everything felt routine. Then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. Adam stepped onto a ridge to get a better view. The mountain gave way beneath him. A massive slab avalanche broke loose without warning. Snow and ice exploded down the slope like a freight train. He screamed Laura's name, trying to warn her, but she was already on her way down, carving through the snow, unaware of the white wall racing toward her. There was no time. The avalanche swallowed her. Adam and Kevin raced into rescue mode, panic surging beneath their training. They scanned the path, their beacons pulsing as they searched for Laura's signal. The snow was deep, nearly 4 meters of it, and heavy as concrete. Every dig was a battle. Every second felt stolen. After 45 agonizing minutes, they reached her, buried, cold, unresponsive. Kevin started CPR. They wrapped her in everything they had, layers of clothing, a bivy sack, and waited for the rescue chopper, hoping against all odds. At 1:30 p.m., the Parks Canada helicopter finally arrived. Laura was airlifted to Foothills Medical Center in Calgary. Her heartbeat was faint, her body dangerously cold. But even after hours of effort, she never woke up. Laura died the next day, her body succumbing to the internal injuries caused by the force of the snow. The shock rippled through the community. Her mother, flying home from Colombia, had no idea what had happened. When the plane touched down, Adam had to connect her with Laura for a final goodbye. But even as time passed, the questions wouldn't let go. How could this have happened? With such experience, such planning, such care. Adam later reflected on the specific slope, how wind-loaded snow, terrain traps, and subtle changes in conditions made it more unstable than they had anticipated. Laura hadn't worn a helmet that day. It wasn't required, and it wasn't something she usually skipped. But in hindsight, Adam couldn't stop asking himself, would it have made a difference? There are no clean answers in the mountains. The line between adventure and tragedy is razor thin. It was October 5th, 2022, in the unforgiving heights of the Canadian Rockies. That morning, 28-year-old Daniel Heritage from Adelaide, Australia, laced up his boots for what was supposed to be one last great climb before the season ended. By his side was Emma, his wife. Together, they'd spent months wandering through Canada's vast wilderness. They chose Mother's Day Buttress, a route they felt good about. They were experienced climbers, and that day, everything felt right. As they ascended the rock face, they chatted between pitches, Daniel's voice always carrying that familiar calm confidence. Emma would later remember how he had just tackled a particularly tough stretch, a steep, narrow crack along the 5th pitch. He'd shouted back to her with a mix of pride and surprise, laughing that it was harder than expected. Then, silence. She waited for the call, the simple word, safe, but it never came. A minute passed, then 5, then 10. Her heart started pounding. She called his name, once, then again, her voice rising with worry. Nothing. And then, without warning, the rope went slack. Emma froze. Her eyes followed the rope as it slipped past her. Then, in the distance, she saw movement, and suddenly, she understood. Daniel was falling. When she reached him, his body lay still. Emma collapsed beside him. She called for help. 90 minutes later, rescuers arrived and told her she had to go. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Later, investigators would try to make sense of it. Daniel hadn't placed more protection after the hardest part of the route. Maybe it was a loose rock, maybe just a misstep. The truth was, no one would ever know for sure. Emma replayed the moment again and again in her mind, grasping for a reason, a cause, something that would make it make sense. But mountains don't give answers, only silence. And then came another cruel blow. When she tried to bring Daniel home to Australia, she discovered their travel insurance didn't cover death from an accident. No funeral home would even accept him without a $122,000 deposit. The weight of grief grew heavier. Daniel's mother stepped in, paying what she could just to begin arrangements, but Emma still needed another $8,000 for his flight, and $115,000 more to bring him home with dignity. The financial burden was staggering. Desperate, Emma's twin sister Jessica started a fundraiser. Over $42,000 poured in, enough to bring him home. Still searching for closure, Emma returned weeks later to Cascade Mountain. She stood at the very spot where Daniel had fallen, expecting the tears to come, expecting grief to crush her again. Years have passed now, and Emma has found a way to live with the pain, to let the memory of Daniel guide her instead of haunt her. She doesn't dwell on the fall anymore, or the questions that will never have answers. She holds on to the laughter, the summit views, the quiet campfire moments, and the man who loved her through every step of their journey. In a tribute to Daniel, she once wrote that he had been her best friend, the love of her life, and her greatest adventure. And even though their time together was stolen too soon, one thing remains unshakable. Daniel will always be with her, in every climb, in every horizon, forever. It was April 18th, 2024, deep in the silent wilderness of Banff National Park. Rob Copelo, 54 years old, was right at home here. For decades, he had devoted himself to these mountains, guiding, teaching, inspiring. He wasn't just known for his skill. Rob was a presence. That morning, Rob was leading a small group of backcountry skiers near Christian Peak, close to the Alberta-British Columbia border. The terrain was both stunning and treacherous. Rob knew this. He always did. He was meticulous, methodical, the kind of guide who double-checked everything, not out of fear, but out of deep respect for the mountains. Every route was chosen with care. That day, like so many before, he scouted the terrain with quiet focus, reading the land like a map only he could see. But the mountain had other plans. Without warning, the ground beneath him gave way. 1 second he was there, standing steady, and the next he was gone. A crevasse had opened beneath him, a jagged maw of ice, and Rob vanished into it. His team froze, horror spreading across their faces. Then instinct kicked in. They scrambled into action, shouting his name, trying to spot him through the blue depths below. They called for help immediately, sending a distress signal to Icefall Lodge, a remote outpost near the Lyle ice field. Time began stretching thin. Within hours, Parks Canada launched a rescue mission, dispatching a helicopter with 3 specialists. As the aircraft roared over the peaks, Rob's team, trembling and desperate, had managed to reach him. Somehow, they pulled his body from the crevasse. He was alive, but just barely. He had spent nearly an hour in the crushing cold. His injuries were catastrophic. The rescue crew worked frantically, wrapping him in thermal blankets, trying to warm his battered body and stabilize him enough for transport. From Lake Louise, a Stars Air ambulance lifted off, bound for Foothills Medical Center in Calgary, 2 hours away. Inside, Rob lay motionless, fighting a battle he couldn't win. He never woke up. The loss sent a tremor through the mountaineering world. Rob Copelo was more than a name. He was a legend. His company, Vita Mountain Guides, had shaped a generation of climbers and skiers. He co-authored the Mountain Guide Manual, mentored hundreds, and became a voice of reason in a world where adventure always came with risk. But behind all of that, the training, the expertise, the gear, Rob was, above all, human, generous, funny, fearless in the way he lived and in the way he loved. Rob was a devoted husband to Rebecca Yarmouth and a father to 2 sons, Dominic and Luca. He'd spent years balancing high peaks with bedtime stories, ice axes with laughter at the dinner table. His death left a wound that words can't reach. Rebecca had once asked him, why go to places where the line between life and death is so thin, where you can be there one moment and gone the next? His answer had always been the same. The mountains weren't about danger. They were where he felt alive. After the accident, the outpouring was immediate. A GoFundMe campaign to support his family was flooded with donations and messages from around the world. Climbers, students, friends, strangers, all wrote in gratitude for the lessons, the moments, the memories Rob had given them. Some thanked him for helping them conquer fear. Others simply said, "Thank you for making the mountain feel like home." Still, in the quiet aftermath, the questions lingered. What if he had stepped a few feet in another direction? What if the crack had opened a moment later? Or not at all? What if help had arrived just a little sooner? But the truth was, no amount of planning, no level of experience, could have prevented what happened that day. Even Rob knew that. Nature plays by its own rules.